By the power of Asgard.
My name is Love.
It's taking over the world through
States of trance. Very different across cultures and schools of thought, but one thing's for sure. This
You'll do what I
is bullshit. I want to talk about exactly why and about all the beautiful ways, real ways this actually happens today. My name is Devin. I'm a music and computer science undergraduate student, so I definitely do not have the credentials to be giving accurate information on this. But I do have a lav mic attached to a spoon, and that gives me cred. That's short for credibility. And you know what? It's not even connected. Like, I couldn't figure out how to get it working. So I'm just using a shotgun mic of the camera instead. A fucking shot! I'm a student of a music professor who specializes in ethnomusicology in Middle Eastern music, and also in having a beautiful mustache. So I'm not completely out of my depth here, just mostly out of my depth. I've also been practicing recreational hypnosis for around 2 years. I have friends who have been doing it a lot longer than I have. So I'm relying very heavily on research as well as interviews to make up for all of it. All right, let's talk about hypnosis. So this pops up a lot in media. The pendulum and spirals can be found to stories dating back to the 1800s. As the psychologist Deirdre Barrett puts it, maidens surrendered their virtue and good men staggered away glassy-eyed to steal and kill. Sound familiar? Oh, and what's the rest of that quote? Well, those of us familiar with real hypnosis convulsed with laughter or indignation. There are a couple of specific stereotypes Barrett pulls out of this chapter. The main one being that trance is irresistible and absolute in its power over the subject. Examples include everything from Svengali, debatably the birth of the hypnotist stereotype, to Marvel's Scarlet Witch, to the original Pokemon anime, to Dr. Somnambulo in an episode of the 2009 Garfield show. Okay. I just want to pause for a second. If you think this is accurate hypnosis, I'm going to be using chapters from the Oxford Handbook for Hypnosis from 2008 for much of this first section. I want to point out there's a huge section at the beginning of this book that I'm largely skipping, dedicated to defining each individual piece of hypnosis, as well as defining the ways they're measuring everything. One of the reasons they give for this is that the study of hypnosis and hypnotherapy necessitates gathering subjective experiences from subjects that can be misguided, misattributed, or motivated in particular ways. They give a number of different strategies to combat that, including checking these verbal reports with other means such as behavior or physiology. For example, measuring quantitative things like sleep improvement or using proven metrics like the Stanford Hypnotic Susceptibility Scale. I tried real hard. There's actually a really cool chapter on results from MRI machines and how there's a noticeable difference between hypnotic suggestions and telling someone they're just imagining something. Another reason they give for being so thorough with all this is Dr. Somnambulo. Like, not him specifically, but the concept of what a hypnotist is being a Middle Eastern guy with a turban using swirly lights. And yes, I know how problematic this is. Honestly, the only thing they could have done to make this more problematic is use a pendulum. Okay, never mind. So let's address that main misconception, that trance is irresistible and absolute in its power over the subject. First off, I want to quickly define trance and hypnosis. The definition the APA gives is this: a state of consciousness involving focused attention and reduced peripheral awareness characterized by an enhanced capability for response to suggestion. Hypnosis typically involves first an introduction where the subject is told that imaginative experiences will be presented, a hypnotic induction, which is an extended initial suggestion for using one's imagination, and a hypnotic procedure used to encourage and evaluate responses to suggestions. Basically, telling the person they're going to be hypnotized, doing an initial induction into a state of hypnosis, and then getting into the meat of things, planning suggestions or finding past memories, etc. There is dispute over this definition in the academic world, especially as to what in particular should count as hypnosis. Also, academic hypnotherapy sources don't really use the word trance. In the Western world, I'm going to say trance and a hypnotic state refers to more or less the same thing. That is to say, a relaxed state someone goes into. It is also not a state unique to hypnosis. It is worth noting that this is a very rigid definition when compared to recreational trance, but we'll get there later. So first off, just from this definition, you can tell it's not as instant as the movies make it out to be. It takes time and trust and a willingness to participate. Specifically, someone who has negative attitudes and expectations toward hypnosis won't really be hypnotized. Having a good attitude doesn't necessarily mean you'll be easily hypnotized, but it's almost a requirement for anyone who is. And even if you go down into one of these states, it's not magic. You're not going to be able to make someone do something they don't want to do.
Changing someone into something they would absolutely hate doesn't really work like that. It would take so much more manipulation and so many more sessions to get someone to turn their entire morality on its head. And that would border on direct abuse.
This is my friend who has chosen to go by her online name, Trance. Very confusing for this topic in particular. Yeah, but just roll with it. Trance has been practicing hypnosis in a recreational sense for the last 12 years and has experienced the therapeutic sense. So yes, this is not to say hypnosis can't be dangerous or can't be used as a manipulation tactic, just that it's a whole heck of a lot more difficult than some swirling lights and a snap of the fingers. It's more a tool to trick the brain into doing things or remembering things.
Like, yes, you can have someone behave in a different way through trance, but usually that is just through empowering their own experience and empowering their perception of their own abilities and or their own patterns of thinking.
Now I want to get into some stuff that I'm less personally well versed in, and that's states of trance and some of the cultures these insane stereotypes come from. We, in the West, have a stereotype for hypnotist. And the best one I can find is from the Garfield show. The fucking Garfield! And it is tied up with a ton of Middle Eastern and South Asian stereotypes. Specifically, the big turban, which is found all over the region, but this large style definitely exists in India. These curly shoes may have originated in modern-day Turkey and may have turned into poulaines, which became fashionable in Europe during the Middle Ages. This incredibly long goatee, which might be racist, might be Islamophobic, who's to say? It is quite verbosely framing non-Western practices as fantastical and exotic, and also unbelievable and something to be gawked at. This is where I point out that there are no sources linked for my description of this man. That is mostly because the important point here is that this is a completely unrealistic stereotype. I do not feel qualified to talk on the specifics of the many, many different cultures these stereotypes come from. So I'm staying very, very general. Anyway, I want to take a look at what is actually happening. Spoiler alert, it's nothing like this. It just isn't. It just isn't. Because of the scope of this essay and the academic resources I personally have access to, I'm going to focus mainly on trance through music and Arab culture. That is not to say other forms of trance do not exist in that area, simply that I'm doing this for a final project and do not have time to research all of it. The French ethnomusicologist Gilbert Rouget. The French ethnomusicologist Gilbert Rouget describes a distinction between a state of trance and a state of ecstasy, where ecstasy is reached in immobility and silence or sensory deprivation, while trance is the opposite of this, sensory overstimulation. So what he describes as trance is much more active and grand than ecstasy, while ecstasy is closer to what my friend Trance would describe as trance. Yes, I know the terminology and the names are mixed up and confusing. It's 'cause he's French, I swear. Trance for Rouget consists of 5 main things. 1, the one in trance is not in their usual state. 2, their relationship to the world is disturbed. 3, they can fall prey to neurophysiological disturbances. 4, their abilities are increased either in reality or otherwise. 5, this increased ability is manifest by its actions or behavior. That's the last point. Principal symptoms can include everything from trembling, swooning, to foaming at the mouth, large extrusions of tongue, analgesia, loss of all reflexive consciousness, herpulation. Wait, what does that actually mean? Herpulation. Erection of hairs on the skin? You could have just said goosebumps! What? This can also include feats such as increased intelligence or virtuosity on an instrument, increased creativity, or fantastical feats like piercing your own flesh without bleeding, walking on burning coals without burning, seeing into the future, and in some stories, fucking dying. These aren't specific to Arab culture, by the way. This is the broad definition Rouget gives at the beginning of his book. Specifically to Arab culture, there's 2 specific kinds of trance that I want to look at, one religious and one secular. First one is a religious trance connected to Sufism, in which a special state of trance, or Wajd, and I'm almost certainly mispronouncing that and I apologize, is defined as when the heart of the devotee is undergoing divine illumination. Notably, the state of trance doesn't have to be outwardly shown. Ghazali, a Persian Sunni Muslim from the 11th century with credentials spanning many different subjects, suggests that one should not abandon themselves to trance and should instead try to overcome it. He claims outward signs of trance say more about the will of the person than the intensity of the trance. Ghazali, and Rouget analyzing him, also draws a distinction between measured movements, i.e. dancing or clapping, and non-measured movements, like trembling, falling, and fucking dying. He claims measured movements only happen in specific rituals, called sama, and non-measured movements happen mainly when someone not of the faith hears verses from the Quran, especially in song. There are quite a few stories Ghazali tells with many of these non-measured movements, normally ending with the listener fucking dying. Do remember that these are stories told by someone from the 11th century, and whether or not they are completely true, or exaggerated, or completely false, is not something I'm really qualified to talk on. Anyway, music is an integral part of the Sama ritual. It consists of both a singer or a chorus and instruments. It goes through several phases, some solo singing, some instrumental, while listeners sit and are gradually overcome by trance, until it's so intense they cannot contain it and begin dancing. I will also say I'm skipping through a lot here. There's a bunch of stuff on when this can happen, on the correct responses, on the ways one can strengthen their will to hold back a more powerful trance, all that. I'm also going to skip through Dhikr, which is a different religious ceremony with much grander acts. This is where the walking on hot coals without being burned comes from. Okay, now contrast this with a secular, or what Rouget calls profane trance. Many of the cultures around this area have the term Tarab, meaning slightly different things. And this word has a lot of meanings, even in one language. This word literally refers to the secular music in this region. Tarab is such an important aspect to this music that the music is named after it. This word more specifically refers to a heightened state of emotion at the climax of a set of Tarab music that is very similar to Rouget's definition of trance. The general form this takes is this. Throughout the course of a performance, and these can be many, many hours long, the music generally gets faster, higher in pitch, more complex, until a climax near the end. It's also worth noting that Tarab only ever happens to the listeners. There's a separate phenomenon that happens in the musicians called saltana, which is similar, but I'd probably define it as closer to a step above a flow state. It, among other things, causes the musician to play their instruments better. The exact thing that makes a performance inspire Tarab are probably some combination of the right music, tempos, tonal framework, time of day, polyrhythms, all that. And even then, it depends on the listener, their state of fatigue, or sobriety. Some people can just get into this state of Tarab more easily than others. So-called deep listeners. Well, that sounds awfully familiar, doesn't it? The end state is one of intense emotion, which includes a lot of Rouget's definition of trance. Everything from enthusiastic exclamations to fainting to some higher form of knowledge or ability. It seems to be a similar state of trance to Wajd, though one not restrained and with some mix of the measured movements from rituals and non-measured movements from outside of rituals. Though spontaneous death does seem much less common than Ghazali makes it out to be, not gonna lie. There are some very specific cases relating to mysticism that may also include hypersuggestibility. Hey, now where have I heard that before? This hypersuggestibility is not a super commonly accepted symptom of Tarab, but it does exist, and it makes for good transition. So, Tarab is so integral to Arab music that performers think of this as they play. The form and the content of the music they play is shaped by Tarab. A good musician will also tailor their music to their audience, to change their music to play off their audience, to feed that state of trance for both of them. It's a very cool concept that has parallels in the Western world, just not nearly as common. Stuff like mosh pits at shows or other club scenes where some people experience quite a similar state. I would know, because I'm a sick as hell mate and go all the time, obviously. Would calling myself a skibbity rizzler be an accurate term, or is that the wrong generation? Still, what Rouget describes as trance does seem fairly distinct to hypnotherapy. So this is when we start looking at something in between, recreational hypnosis. Recreational hypnosis is a very understudied subject. You'll notice there'll be very few references from this point out. Most of my information comes from my own experiences as well as stories and interviews from the snapshot of the community I've run into. It's all very accurate to what each of these people practice, but I may or may not be overgeneralizing. I'm not sure. Recreational hypnosis is doing hypnosis and going into trance, or sending someone into trance for fun. Many of the same tenets from hypnotherapy and even Wajd and Tarab still apply. So what sets hypnotherapy apart from recreational?
Boring. It is boring and scientific and so viscerally reductive.
This is Oddity, who's been practicing recreational hypnosis as a hypnotist for around 8 years. She says the definition of hypnosis the APA gives isn't really accurate to what she does.
It makes it sound much more simple than it is. It also makes it sound much more complicated and scientific than it is. It's more so entertainment. It is as diverse as any other form of entertainment.
The scientific community has all of these definitions in place for what can and can't be hypnosis and how to measure everything to get around the prejudices surrounding hypnosis. But that also means their definition is going to be too rigid and leaves parts out of how it's actually practiced outside of a therapeutic context.
It's very fun. It brings a lot of connection between you and the person you're going under with. So it's very intimate in not a sexual way, but more of a intimate, affectionate way. It's less of a magic trick and more of a, hey, I love you. I want you to feel good. I'm going to make your brain a little soupy and have you have some fun.
Most of the time, this consists of the same couple of steps that hypnotherapy does. There's some amount of trust between the hypnotist and the subject, which could be as little as a conversation beforehand or a certain environment. There's some sort of induction into a relaxed, more suggestible state of trance. Then sometimes that trance is the end goal, sometimes actions or feelings are suggested, sometimes triggers are planted. Triggers are shortcuts that are trained and practiced. This may be where the origin of the stereotype of a snap of the fingers with the word sleep immediately dropping someone comes from. That is not something that was instant the first time, but comes from planting a trigger in a state of trance that took a full induction to reach, and practice after that. There's a ton of fun and creative triggers that people have, some tied to specific people or mental states. Everything from feeling drunk, to freezing in place, to fucking die. No, I'm kidding about that one.
If you want it to happen, it can and will. But you cannot be made to do something that you do not want to do, generally.
There are caveats here. Hypnosis is not a completely safe thing to practice. It is giving away your trust to someone else, and it's susceptible to manipulation, especially through multiple sessions. Some people are more easily hypnotized than others and have to work on strengthening their safety mechanisms. Some people are just more manipulatable, and some people are very good at manipulating people. This goes for all types of hypnosis. For hypnotherapy, doctors have NPI numbers that you can check. Make sure they're a registered hypnosis therapist. For other forms, make sure you're not walking into a cult. Do your research. Go find one of the "Is this a cult" forums that are out there. I've got one linked. If it's one-on-one, make sure you're being careful that it's not a toxic or abusive relationship. Again, I've got some resources linked. But in the end, it's fun. It's a form of entertainment and connection and relaxation or stimulation in a way much like Tarab. Tarab is reached in a very different way, but is still the same state of trance. You probably don't have the suggestibility most of the time, because that's not something you expect. But it's an enjoyable state where your mind is leaving you to some extent. Though the people I interviewed are skeptical of some of the symptoms of trance Rouget lists, specifically the fantastical ones.
Trembling, shuddering, swooning, fainting, falling to the ground, yawning, lethargy. That's all absolutely normal. Same with the goosebumps. All of that is just visible symptoms of the body being calming and then getting exhausted. Foaming at the mouth? No. Large extrusions of tongue, unless you're telling them to stick their tongue out, is not going to happen. Same with the paralysis. That only happens if you're like, freeze.
Again, this is not to say that these things don't happen in other cultures, just that they don't happen over here in the West. And that I couldn't fuck off to Oman or the UAE for 2 years and tell you what happened. Much love, Garvey. All in all, trance is a beautiful art form, practiced by many, many different cultures in many different ways. We can try to study it, and I think we should, but it's going to be difficult to capture all of the nuance and beauty that comes from something so personal, and yet so connecting and powerful. And if I'm lucky, I'll never have to look at Dr. Somnambulo ever again. Thank you for watching.
I think I'm out of my mind. Oh no, you've got me losing my mind. Oh no, my mind. Oh no, 'cause I can't think no more. You think I'm out of my mind. Oh no, you've got me losing control. Oh, my mind. Oh no, you've got me losing my mind for you.
I want to quickly say thank you to everyone who's helped me with this project. To Trance and Oddity especially for agreeing to be interviewed and recorded in such a short time. For Bradford Garvey, the professor who's taught this and chose to make the final a video essay instead of a traditional essay. To all of the writers of the many sources I've used, they're all in the description below. As well as the music I've used throughout this video, also linked below. Enter Fig behind the camera.
Hello.
Yippee! And for y'all for staying and watching the entire thing. The world's a beautiful place. Stay safe out there.
You've got me losing my mind for you. You got me losing my mind.